Hi everyone, and welcome to the Handy Philosopher channel. That is, we're now starting, or the moment that certainly I've been waiting for, the beginning of our Nietzsche reading. One of the truly great philosophers, and mustaches. I mean, just look at him. What a gorgeous man he was. And just you can feel like the only thing that could make a mustache grow that fully is furious anger that's obviously stewing away inside the person. The only way that it can come out is through the mustache. And this is certainly what we'll get with Nietzsche, just furious rage and anger. I always like to imagine, an angry German reading me Nietzsche because I feel like that's how he would have wanted you to hear his readings. A bit of background. I know I rabbit on about Nietzsche a lot. He's, utterly insane, and most of what he says is trash, but which I'm sure is going to offend some people. But the background we need to know for our reading. So this is from one of Nietzsche's later texts called Beyond Good and Evil, and I mean he advocates just that, moving beyond societal's norms of good and bad, and right and wrong, and well, good and evil. Um, Nietzsche was a strong advocate of will, and we'll see him talking about this in the section that we're going to be reading through today. Um, and central to a lot of Nietzsche's writings was a notion that he referred to as the will to power. So this is inherent in all of us. It is the drive that we have to enter into conflict and dominate, and it's basically the spark that makes us do anything ever, anything that you've ever wanted to do. Like you've just in your, within your gut, you've felt you wanted to do something. That has been the will to power speaking out. And Nietzsche believes that morality has essentially been created to subdue our will to power, to make us sheep, essentially, and draw us into the herd. Because the herd is threatened by those who would embrace their will to power. And the only way we can do this is by rejecting morality and social norms. If we were to ever do this, and if we were to truly transcend this sort of stuff, we would become what Nietzsche referred to as the Übermensch. Loosely translated as the Superman or the Overman. This is someone who would rise up, and they would go beyond morality. They would create their own moral code, and it would be based on their will to power. So without too much further ado, take out your books and grab your pens and highlighters, and we're going to be jumping around beyond good and evil a little bit. So the first section that we're going to be reading is section 199 in the text. This we're going to see Nietzsche, jumping into a pretty scathing attack of the Europe that he lived in. Not all that different to the world that we live in now. What is being held up as the greatest form of societal, like I guess, politics is democracy, and this idea of equality. These hard and fast ideas of rules and morality that is forced upon us is much the same as it was then. And so, whilst obviously it's a long time since Nietzsche wrote, which was in the late 1800s, there's still a lot we can relate to today. So we're going to see Nietzsche really having a crack at, firstly, the herd. So this is basically the general population who are utterly terrified of being dominated. However, funnily enough, will be relieved when they are, as we'll talk about a little bit later on with the Napoleon example. And we're also going to be talking, Nietzsche's also going to launch an attack on democracy itself and say that this is truly evidence of the herd just destroying any virtue that there is in politics or in being a leader, particularly. Democracy has reduced being a leader to actually being the greatest of the slaves. Again, I'll expand on this as we're going through it, but if we think of our democratic leaders, they often wax lyrical about uh, serving the people and simply being a servant of the people. Nietzsche would throw up in his mouth at the thought of this. So here we go. Books at the ready, section 199. I'll try not to get too, worked up as I'm reading, but Nietzsche, he does something to me, so no promises. Here we go. Inasmuch as ever since there have been human beings, there have also been human herds, family groups, communities, tribes, nations, states, churches, and always very many who obey compared with the very small number of those who command. So, the vast majority of humans throughout history have been those who obey, the obedient ones. It's a rare spirit that commands. Considering, that is to say, that hitherto nothing has been practiced and cultivated among men better or longer than obedience. Okay, so that word, obedience, and Nietzsche uses the word cultivated, and think of what that means. Like, we grow and we nurture obedience among humanity. This is a really core idea of the role that morals play from Nietzsche's perspective. We're taught morals from a very early age, and what are we actually trying to teach in our children? Nietzsche would argue we're teaching obedience in our children, and this is because this is what our society really wants people to be. They want them to be obedient. They don't want them to, to try and change things, really. Uh, it is fair to suppose that, as a rule, a need for it is by now innate as a kind of formal conscience, which commands, "Thou shalt unconditionally do this, unconditionally not do that." In short, "Thou shalt." So this idea of a formal conscience. So what Nietzsche's saying is that obedience has now been so well ingrained in humanity, so well cultivated in humanity over generations, that we're now almost born with an obedient instinct. We're so good at cultivating obedience in the next generation that it happens almost as a reflex action. And so this idea of a formal conscience, it's sort of like looking at society's morals. Like, this is the formal conscience. This is what our obedient training has made us yearn for rules and regulations, so that we can know how we're supposed to behave and what we're not supposed to do, particularly. So this need for, this desire we have to find rules, this need seeks to be satisfied and to fill out its form with a content. In doing so, it grasps about wildly, according to the degree of its strength, impatience, and tension, with little discrimination as a crude appetite, and accepts whatever any commander, parent, teacher, law, class prejudice, public opinion shouts in its ears. So basically, we as humans are so desperate to find rules to follow that we will blindly follow any command that's given to us by any commander or any authority figure. And you see, parent, teacher, law, class, prejudice, public opinion. Nietzsche is saying that, the herd is so eager to hear the rules that these leaders are going to be putting forward, so that now they have guidance. What they've always lacked, what the herd fears the most, is not knowing where it should be going. They don't care where they go. They just want someone to tell them where to go. So it's not even about this higher idea of good and bad. It's actually just purely about being told what to do. We yearn to be given restrictions. The strange narrowness of human evolution, its hesitations, its delays, its frequent retrogressions and rotations, are due to the fact that the herd instinct of obedience has been inherited best and at the expense of the art of commanding. If we think of this instinct taken to its ultimate extravagance, there would be no commanders or independent men at all, or if they existed, they would suffer from a bad conscience, and in order to be able to command would have to practice a deceit upon themselves. The deceit, that is, that they too were only obeying. So here Nietzsche is beginning his attack on democracy. So the herd has done such a good job of training and cultivating obedience in society that even those who have the will to command, they feel guilty for that will to command. They feel ashamed that they would dare to, wish to command. And so what they do is they frame their command in the form of obedience. Okay, and as I said at the start, think of our democratic leaders and what they say about commanding, that they're just doing the will of the people. Yeah, this is exactly what Nietzsche's talking about. They too were only obeying, even the commanders. I'm simply obeying what the people want, as they command. They're so ashamed of their commanding instinct. For Nietzsche, it's nothing to be ashamed of. They should be embracing it. This state of things actually exists in Europe today. I call it the moral hypocrisy of the commanders. They know no way of defending themselves against their bad conscience other than to pose as executors of moral ancient. Pose as executors of more ancient or higher commands, commands of ancestors, of the constitution, of justice, of the law, or even of God. Or even to borrow herd maxims from the herd's way of thinking and appear as the first servant of the people, for example, or as an instrument of the common good. So this is Nietzsche just really cracking into everything that was driving Europe at this time. So the push for democracy, the reliance on religion, particularly Christianity. What do we hear? And Christianity is a great example of this, and it's part of the reason that Nietzsche hated Christianity so much. Jesus is held up as, the first servant of the people. He's brought down to earth as a lowly Jew, so one of the most looked down upon groups in the Middle East at that time. And what happens to him? Well, he gets nailed to a cross like a criminal. God Himself presents as the servant of the people as an instrument of the common good, let alone the rulers, the presidents and the prime ministers. They always frame themselves as the servants of the people. Okay, so this is what Nietzsche's talking about. These people are so ashamed of their command that they have to frame their lives in this way so as to escape their guilt for being commanders. On the other hand, the herdman of Europe today, so this is like the general public, makes himself out to be the only permissible kind of man and glorifies the qualities through which he is tame, peaceable, and useful to the herd as the real human virtues. So here we've got a good comparison to Nietzsche and to Aristotle, and soon we'll see Nietzsche in I think it's the next section that we read, launching an attack directly at Aristotle. But basically what Nietzsche's saying is, what is it that the herd, hold up as virtuous behavior? That which the herd prioritizes. So, compliance, obedience. We'll see he's about to list what the virtues of the herd are. So, namely, public spirit. Wanting to do work in your community and that sort of thing. Benevolence, so love, consideration, thinking about others, industriousness, hard working, but in that not hard working in like a genuine sense. This is like someone who goes to their job and they're hard working. Oh, you're really industrious. They're not working for themselves. Moderation, don't take too much, be moderate. Modesty, never ever gloat. Forbearance and pity. Okay, so we see here, these are the virtues of the herdman, and this is what is held up as the ideal person in Europe at this point. In those cases, however, in which leaders and bellwethers are thought to be indispensable, there is attempt after attempt to substitute for them an adding together of clever herdmen. This, for example, is the origin of all parliamentary constitutions. So what Nietzsche's saying here is the herd needs some sort of leadership. And so they understand that they must have a leader, but so that their leader doesn't threaten them, they figure out a way so that the leader is actually just a cobbling together of other herdsmen. And if you think of a parliament, that's what it is. It's just people who are brought together to lead. And so that they're never dominated by one, they cobble together these herdsmen. uh, so that they can lead. All this notwithstanding, what a blessing, what a release from a burden becoming intolerable the appearance of an unconditional commander is for this herd animal. So, what's interesting, Nietzsche thinks, is that the herd is actually so relieved when a true commander rises up, and here we'll see him talk about Napoleon. Uh, the herd animal European. The effect produced by the appearance of Napoleon is the latest great witness. The history of the effect of Napoleon is almost the history of the higher happiness this entire century has attained, or highest happiness this century has attained in its most valuable men and moments. So, what Nietzsche's saying is if you want to see what Europe would be like if it didn't give in to the herd morality, then look at what Napoleon was able to achieve. A truly great military general who didn't allow, the past or the morality of his time to simply, keep him in chains. He led and he dominated and he sought out conflict uh, and he was victorious the vast majority of the time, and he grew an empire from that. This is what mankind is truly capable of, Nietzsche thought. But we're so terrified as a herd that um, we fear these leaders, but we're so relieved when they come about because they take the reins with a firm hand. So we now skip section 200 and we skip down to 201. And here we'll see, like, I like to think of this as Nietzsche presenting the two stages of society. In the first stage of building a society, this is the securing and establishing a society. You need like these leaders. You need people who aren't going to be held back by morality. You need people who are willing to get their hands dirty. And really the history of any society will show you this. The leaders at the beginning, they are not what we would necessarily call moral people by the current standard. They generally did stuff that's pretty sketchy. Um, and the reason that we accepted it is because, well, we needed that to get society in place. But as soon as society is now secured and it's safe from external attacks, we now seek to eliminate those leaders that would rise up from within. And this is when the herd morality really takes effect. Okay, so we'll see here, sort of talking about these two stages. We'll get the attack on Aristotle as promised. And yeah, so let's continue on. Section 201. So long as the utility or function which dominates moral value judgments is solely that which is useful to the herd. So what Nietzsche is saying here is morality is purely the rules and norms that are useful to the herd. Okay, useful for maintaining the herd's position. So long as the object is solely the preservation of the community and the immoral is sought precisely and exclusively in that which seems to imperil the existence of the community, so long as that is the case, there can be no morality of love of one's neighbor. So this seems a little bit weird. Nietzsche will clarify it because you'd think, oh, love thy neighbor. This is something we've heard all the time. This is a core tenet of at least Christian morality, and others as well. Isn't this a herd morality? And what Nietzsche's basically saying is, no, it's a lie. Love thy neighbor is actually impossible because are we really taught to love our neighbor? Think of the messages we get from politicians and the news. Are we really being encouraged to love our neighbor, or are we being encouraged to fear our neighbor? Are we being encouraged to fear other people? So for Nietzsche, the herd cultivates fear, and fear is really the main tool that the herd uses to push its morality. If the herd can get you to feel fear, then they can guide you wherever they want. Okay, and they do this collectively. So we've seen this first part is really good for understanding what role morality plays in society according to the herd. So it is there purely for the preservation of the community, and that which is deemed immoral is exclusively that which seems to imperil the existence of the community. So any threat to society, any threat to the norms of society is framed as immoral. according to Nietzsche. Supposing that even there a constant little exercise of consideration, pity, fairness, mildness, mutual aid was practiced, supposing that even at that stage of society all those drives are active, which are later honorably designated virtues, and are finally practically equated with the concept of morality, in that era they do not yet by any means belong to the domain of moral valuations. They are still extra-moral. So what Nietzsche's talking about here is the early stages of society. Okay. Um, in the early stages of society, things like fairness and pity and mildness and mutual aid, they might be there and they might be practiced, but they're not being held up as moral because they serve no purpose. Okay. They are not going to cement society and secure society. An act of pity, for example, was during the finest age of Rome considered neither good nor bad, neither moral nor immoral, and even if it was commended, this commendation was entirely compatible with a kind of involuntary disdain, as soon, that is, as it was set beside any action which served the welfare of the whole of the res publica. Ultimately, love of one's neighbor is always something secondary, in part conventional and arbitrarily illusory when compared with fear of one's neighbor. So, what Nietzsche is saying here is if you really think about the message of society, the primary message we get is be afraid of those who would seek to overthrow us. Okay, be terrified of anyone who could overthrow us. So, what whilst society may say to us, love thy neighbor, it's actually secondary to the main message of society, which is be scared of people, outsiders, and also the people within. Okay, the enemy may be a foreigner and it may be the person living next door. Either one of these could likely be someone who's seeking to overthrow the morality of society. In essence, anyone can be a bad person. Okay, so they might preach love thy neighbor, but what they actually really want us to do and what they show us we should do is fear thy neighbor. Be afraid of everyone. Anyone is a threat. This is what society really wants us to think. Once the structure of society seems to have been in general fixed and made safe from external dangers, it is this fear of one's neighbor which again creates new perspectives of moral valuation. So this is the transition from stage one to stage two. Okay. And we're about to see Nietzsche say that all of the things that were valuable in stage one are then reframed as immoral, and all the things that were neither good nor bad in stage one, like pity, like this is neither good nor bad. It's not actually securing society at all. It's not that you're doing anything wrong, but it's a neutral act, is now framed as good. Okay. So there are certain strong and dangerous drives such as enterprisingness. So these are the drives or kind of the virtues of what was needed in stage one. Enterprisingness, foolhardiness, revengefulness, craft, rapacity, ambition, which hitherto had not only to be honoured from the point of view of their social utility, under different names naturally from those chosen here, but also mightily developed and cultivated, because they were constantly needed to protect the community as a whole against the enemies of the community as a whole. So what Nietzsche's saying is these things, and I've got them up on the screen here, the virtues of the of what we needed in society to secure it. These are sort of the virtues of the leader. These aren't the virtues of the herd. The herd is not ambitious. It's not crafty. It's not revengeful. It's not enterprising. It doesn't want to, change things. It doesn't want things to be better. It wants things to be the same because the same is predictable and safe and boring. This is what the herd really wants. So these were useful to the community when it was being established, because this is how you secure a whole community against the enemies of the whole community. But these drives are now felt to be doubly dangerous now that the diversionary outlets for them are lacking. So now that we've defeated all of our big enemies, We no longer want people to be enterprising and foolhardy and revengeful and crafty and rapacious and ambitious. Okay, and are generally branded as immoral and given over to calumny. The antithetical drive. So the what we mean by antithetical, and anytime you see this word, we're talking about the opposite. So the opposite thesis, the antithesis. So the antithetical drive and inclinations now come into moral honor, step by step. The herd instinct draws its conclusions. How much or how little that is dangerous to the community, dangerous to equality, resides in an opinion, in a condition or emotion, in a will, in a talent. That is now the moral perspective. Here again, a great quote, and I've got it up on the screen. Fear is the mother of morality. So now that the herd doesn't fear an outsider, it has to look within to find its enemies. Okay, and so it now begins to fear from within. And it's the members of the herd who are ambitious that it's going to fear. It's the members of the herd who are revengeful that it's going to fear. When the highest and strongest drives, breaking passionately out, carrying the individual far above and beyond the average and lowlands of the herd conscience, the self-confidence of the community goes to pieces. Its faith in itself, its spine, as it were, is broken. Consequently, it is precisely these drives which are most branded and calumniated. Lofty spiritual independence, the will to stand alone, great intelligence even, are felt to be dangerous. Everything that raises the individual above the herd makes his neighbor quail. And makes his neighbor quail is henceforth called evil. So all of those list of things that were desirable in stage one are now called evil in stage two. The fair, modest, obedient, self-effacing disposition, the mean and average, so direct attack at Aristotle here, the mean and average in desires acquires moral names and honors. Eventually, under very peaceful conditions, there is less and less occasion or need to educate one's feelings in severity and sternness. So in other words, we're kind of blunting society. We wrap ourselves up in cotton wool so that we never have to face the reality of what society is, which is conflict and drive. And so we lose our sternness and our severity. And now every kind of severity, even severity in justice, begins to trouble the conscience. A stern and lofty nobility and self-responsibility is received almost as an offense. And awakens mistrust. The lamb, even more than the sheep, is held in higher and higher respect. So this is a great little section again from Nietzsche, using the analogy of, he uses animal analogies quite a bit, and the herd, imagine a herd of sheep. Well, what's even more helpless than a sheep in a herd? It's a lamb. This is even more timid, even more even less aggressive or even less dangerous than a sheep is, which in itself isn't particularly dangerous. So now that society has established itself, it's even moving beyond honoring the sheep, and now it honors the lamb. Again, a little bit of a dig at Christianity. Remember, Jesus is referred to as the Lamb of God. So definitely a reference here to Christianity. There comes a point of morbid mellowing and over-tenderness in the history of society at which it takes the side even of him who harms it, the criminal, and does so honestly and wholeheartedly. Punishment that seems to it somewhat unfair, certainly the idea of being punished and having to punish, is unpleasant to it, makes it afraid. Is it not enough to render him harmless? Why punish him as well? To administer punishment is itself dreadful. With this question, herd morality, the morality of timidity, draws its ultimate conclusion. So again, it's hard not to discuss the slam of Christianity that Nietzsche is doing here. A core tenet in Christian morality and Christian justice is the idea of turn the other cheek. Forgive those who wrong you. Um, open your doors to the people who would rob you. This sort of, blessed are the meek, blessed are the mild, and the full quote, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Nietzsche, he raged against this very concept. The meek don't inherit the earth. Okay, um, and so what we're seeing here is Nietzsche is saying, this society, when it comes around to full effect, it is even reluctant to punish criminals. That's how twisted this herd morality is. It becomes so timid that it can't even punish those who would wrong it. And if you think of, what happens to someone who wrongs someone who's truly powerful, they get destroyed. This is the way that society should be, Nietzsche thinks. Okay? Um, but we turn the other cheek instead. So, supposing all danger, the cause of fear, could be abolished, this morality would therewith also be abolished. So, Nietzsche now is shifting to a sort of a different point. Imagine if we could get rid of every threat to society. Well, the whole herd morality would actually be made redundant if we did that, which is interesting. Um, this morality would therewith also be abolished. It would no longer be necessary. It would no longer regard itself as necessary. He who examines the conscience of the present-day European will have to extract from 1,000 moral recesses and hiding places always the same imperative, the imperative of herd timidity. We wish that there will one day no longer be anything to fear. This is what the herd cries out for. One day, everywhere in Europe, the will and way to that day is now called progress. So what Nietzsche is saying is the true tragedy of Europe as it was then, and arguably society as it is now, is that anything that takes us a step towards the elimination of fear is considered progress. When for Nietzsche, fear should be a drive. Fear should be a fire that propels you. Okay, so I know the recording's going on a little bit long, but we'll continue on. Okay, so let's continue with section 203. It's a bit of a longer one, but to be honest, Nietzsche doesn't present too many different points. He just sort of goes on a little bit at times. So here Nietzsche's sort of shifting to, well, what does I guess what he would say a good person, in terms of the good life, what is a good person actually thinking and doing at this time? At the moment he's ruminated a lot about the herd and the herd morality. So what about those who go against the herd? So that's what this section is about. All right, so here we go. We who have a different faith, we to whom the democratic movement is not merely a form assumed by political organizations in decay, but also a form assumed by man in decay. That is to say, in diminishment, in process of becoming mediocre and losing his value. Whither must we direct our hopes? So here, sort of scathing again of democracy, identifying the democratic process as a sign of society in decay and also of mankind in decay, and the process through which man becomes mediocre. So who should people who see this, who believe what Nietzsche believes, who should they turn to, is what he's saying. Towards the new philosophers. We have no other choice towards spirits strong and original enough to make a start on authentic evaluations and to revalue and reverse eternal values. So these are the types of people who will look at even the most commonly held views and really critique them and criticize them and ask where they came from and ask what right there is for any view to be deemed correct or incorrect. Okay. Towards heralds and forerunners, towards men of the future who in the present knot together the constraint which compels the will of millennia onto new paths, to teach man the future of man as his will. So what Nietzsche's saying is for us to fulfill our full potential in the future, we have to understand that morality is opposed to will, and that for us to become, the great beings that we're destined to be, we have to embrace our will as dependent on a human will, and to prepare for great enterprises and collective experiments in discipline and breeding, so as to make an end to that gruesome dominion of chance and nonsense that has hitherto been called history. The nonsense of the greatest number is only its latest form. For that a new kind of philosopher and commander will some time be needed, in face of whom whatever has existed on earth of hidden, dreadful, and benevolent spirits may well look pale and dwarfed. It is the image of such leaders which hover before our eyes. So these are the people who are looking for, looking for a change. People like Nietzsche, basically. Uh, May I say that aloud, you free spirits? The circumstances one would have in part to create, in part to employ, to bring them into existence, the conjectural paths and tests by virtue of which a soul could grow to such height and power, it would feel compelled to these tasks. A re-evaluation of values under whose novel or new pressure and hammer a conscience would be steeled. I'll pause for a moment. Nietzsche does love his long sentences. So what he said here is like he's starting to describe what would happen for these truly sort of great people, if that makes sense. So they would see the world around them and they would be compelled to act because of the just the decimation of mankind that they're seeing. This herd morality just chipping away at, uh, the true greatness of mankind. A heart transformed to brass so that it might endure the weight of such a responsibility. So again, these are still the attributes of the great, person. Really the attributes of the Übermensch. On the other hand, the need for such leaders, the terrible danger they might not appear, or might fail, or might degenerate, these are our proper cares and concerns. Do you know that, you free spirits? So Nietzsche's saying that for those people who are looking for these new leaders, these new philosophers, as Nietzsche calls them, their great fear is that they'll either never show themselves, or that when they do, they won't be able to fulfill their will. This is what truly terrifies the people who agree with Nietzsche. These are the heavy, remote thoughts and thunderclouds that pass across our life sky. There are few more grievous pains than once to have beheld, divined, sensed, how an extraordinary man missed his way and degenerated. But he who has the rare eye for the collective danger that man himself may degenerate, he who, like us, has recognized the tremendous fortuitousness which has hitherto played its game with the future of man, a game in which no hand, not even a finger of God, took any part, he who has divided the fatality that lies concealed in the idiotic guilelessness and blind confidence of modern ideas, even more in the whole of Christian Europe morality, he suffers from a feeling of anxiety, with which no other can be compared, for he comprehends in a single glance all that which, given a favourable accumulation and intensification of forces and tasks, could be cultivated out of man. I'm just scanning ahead to see where the full stop is here. Not for a little while, so we'll pause again. Damn Nietzsche. He wasn't great with his punctuation. But so what, sort of what's been covered here. Okay. So what this great person is going to see is that there is the potential that mankind is going to decay. It's going to degenerate, as he says. And the other thing that this person's going to realize, and I'll just go back up a little bit, he who, like us, has recognized the tremendous fortuitousness which has hitherto played its game with the future of man. Basically, what he's saying is this person will look back through the history of mankind and see chance. They won't see a plan. They won't see some sort of grand design. And, the next part, a game in which no hand, not even a finger of God took any part. Nietzsche is basically spitting in the face of anyone who would argue that man is here because of some plan by God, or some plan in general. Fortune has allowed us to take our place at the top of the pecking order, in our world. And if we're not careful, we'll lose it, to this herd morality. There's a reason that sheep aren't the dominant species on the planet. Um, uh, so yeah, where did we get up to? So could be cultivated. So they're also going to see, the last little bit I read, which was could be cultivated out of man. They'll see the potential that mankind still has, what we could be if we could just break free of this herd morality. He knows with all the knowledge of his conscience how the greatest possibilities in man are still unexhausted, and how often before the type man has been faced with strange decisions and new paths. He knows even better from his most painful memories against what wretched things an evolving being of the highest rank has hitherto usually been shattered and has broken off, sunk, and has itself become wretched. So uh, so basically, looking at, again, what could potentially happen of man. Earlier on, the possibilities in man are still unexhausted, but this person would be extraordinarily worried that, if this wasn't, taken up by mankind, if we don't push ourselves and try and fulfill our will, then this, wretched, degeneration is going to happen. Um, so continuing on, the collective degeneration of man down to that which the socialist dolts and blockheads today see as their man of the future, as their ideal. This degeneration and diminution, of man to the perfect herd animal. So this, for Nietzsche, is the true, goal of the herd. They want to perfect mankind as a herd animal. And here, Nietzsche's going sort of a step beyond slamming democracy and slamming, he's here slamming socialism, which a lot of people confuse with communism. It's not quite the same thing. Well, it's not the same thing at all, really. Socialism is all about, the society helping each other as much as possible, sort of holding everyone up as much as you possibly can. For Nietzsche, this is the perfect opposite of what we should be trying to do. We should be trying to propel ourselves to greatness. If that means at the expense of others, then this is, this is what happens. And if, we're lamenting this, or if we're feeling guilty about this, then it's simply a sign that the herd morality has gotten to us. So, for as they say to the man of the free society, this animalization of man to the pygmy animal of equal rights and equal pretensions is possible. So, what Nietzsche's pointing out here is that this isn't just an idea. Like, he is legitimately worried, that the poisons that he sees as ideals of things like equal rights and equal pretensions, it may just be enough to poison mankind and destroy the possibility of embracing a great future. There is no doubt about that. He who has once thought this possibility through to the end knows one more kind of disgust than other men do, and perhaps also a new task. So anyone who has thought about this, Nietzsche says, anyone who has contemplated what could potentially happen if the herd morality wins, and truly wins, because it's definitely winning, Nietzsche says, or Nietzsche would believe, then the two things occur to them. They know a new disgust that the herd does not. They know the bitter just guile in their mouth of, watching humanity decay and crumble at the hands of the herd. And because of that disgust, they may also know a new task. In other words, they may be thrown into action. All right, so we'll leave the angry German there. I hope you've enjoyed it. I always love reading Nietzsche. As I said, don't agree with a lot of what he says, but it's good fun to read. Uh, don't burn down your houses or anything like that just yet. We've got a couple more sections of Nietzsche to go, but I hope you've enjoyed this first section. Have a great day, and embrace your will to power, everyone. All right, be the Ubermensch. Bye.